Economic growth. The economy can be measured based on what that country is producing in terms of goods and the services it provides. So when you are measuring your national economy, when you are measuring the economic growth of a country, it means you want to know how good the economy is, or how better the economy is becoming. Do you understand? So we start by understanding what national income is. So what is national income? National income is what? The value of goods and services in an economy that is being produced in an economy in the financial year. That is national income. So how do we measure our national income? There are different ways in which we can measure the national income. One, we can measure it through the gross domestic product, the GDP. So before we go here, look at what I wrote. The national income is used to measure the size of an economy. That means how big the economy is. Not the population here, how big in terms of the finance. So the key measurement of the national income is the gross domestic product, the GDP, which is the total value of goods and services produced in an economy. It is measured using the market prices, which means you have to put into consideration indirect taxes. Do you understand? Because in the market prices, you have to pay taxes in the cost of you buying. So indirect taxes are what? Taxes charged on consumption. So it has to be put into consideration whenever we are getting the GDP. I think that's clear. So the GDP of a country can be used to determine the growth of a country. So the formula for the GDP is C plus I plus G plus X minus N, where C is what? The consumption. I wrote it already. Private consumption, what you consume individually, what we consume. Gross private investment. So private firms, the total of what they have invested on. Government spending or government is spending on government investment. Then your X stands for the value of export minus the value of imports. So it is C plus I plus G plus X minus N, where X minus N is value of exports minus the value of imports. I think that's clear. So the other ways of measuring the national income are as follows. The other way you can measure the national income is using the gross value added, which is GDP minus indirect taxes plus subsidies. Here, the GDP which you already know, the value of goods and services produced in that country, minus indirect taxes we pay on consumption, plus subsidies that government has given to us. That's financial help from government. So your GDP minus your indirect taxes plus subsidies, you used to get the GVA. Is it clear? Then in this course, we can find the basic price. What is the basic price? The basic price adjustment is indirect taxes minus subsidies. So they could ask you in the exam to find the basic price adjustments. It is indirect taxes minus subsidies. So taxes we pay on consumption minus the financial help from government, which is subsidy. Then another way we can measure the national income is using the gross national product, the GNP. So for the GNP, I said this is the market value of goods and services produced over a period of time through labor or property supply by citizens, both domestically and overseas. So here, the market value of what has been produced in this economy, both by the people in this country, both by the citizens of this country and the citizens of this country abroad. Do you get it? So the formula is GNP equals to GDP plus earnings overseas. That's the formula. Is it clear? So GNP is GDP plus the earnings overseas. That means the total amount of money made by the citizens of this country abroad. Is that clear? Then another way to measure the national income is to use the gross national income, which is what GNI, which is, I said this is the value of goods and services produced by a country over a period of time, plus net overseas interest, trade payment, and dividends. So GNI, the formula for GNI is GDP plus net overseas on interest plus your dividend. Is it clear? So it's another way you can measure the national income of a country. So GNI is GDP plus net overseas interest. Net overseas interest plus dividend. Dividends. So dividends are factor incomes. What you get from your factors of production. We call it factor income. Factor income. So from the factors of production, like maybe the entrepreneurs, they invested out there. So what they get from their investment, their dividends. So it is part of your calculation of GNI. That's why we say transfers the property supplied by local or the people abroad. So Libyans who have jobs, who have businesses abroad, who have companies abroad, will get what we call dividend. So the dividend will be transferred to the national economy of Libya as what? As our GNP. So GNP is GDP plus earnings overseas. So the amount of money I earn here, I'm taking it back to Nigeria, is what we call overseas earning. Is it clear? So the amount of money the Libyans make abroad, bringing down here is what we call their own overseas earning. Is it clear? So for gross national income, we talked about it also. GNI equals to GDP, net overseas interest plus dividend. So net overseas interest is based on the capital, the investment abroad. In terms of capital invested abroad, what you get back is interest. And you, as a Libyan who have investments, who is a shareholder abroad, we also make dividends. Here you have business abroad. Here you have investment abroad. So calculating this plus the GDP, that's the value of goods and services produced here, will give you a gross national income. Just like gross national income here. So that's why gross national income is the value of goods and services produced by a country over a period of time, plus net overseas interest, the capital invested abroad, plus dividends, the investment in companies abroad that you get. So that's our GNI. I think it's clear. Then we have the NNI, the net national income. So when we talk about the net national income, we said what? This measures the value of investment abroad and depreciation from the net capital stock. So for NNI, it is GNP minus depreciation. It is net national income minus depreciation. Your national income, which is your GDP, minus depreciation. Do you get it? So NNI is national income minus depreciation. So for the NNI, whatever we buy in terms of assets, they will continue to depreciate, right? So the value at which they depreciate, you take it away from the value of what you have produced with it. Is it clear? So that's NNI, which is national income minus depreciation. National income is the same as the GDP. So you could write GDP minus depreciation. Is it clear? So for the national income, we have what we call the value of national income and the volume of national income. What's the difference between the value of national income and the volume of national income? When we talk about the value of national income, I wrote, this is the cost of a food basket of goods and services that can be bought at a given price level. Because when you are measuring the national income, we use the basket of food on goods and services. So the cost of goods and services that you can buy with certain amount of money within a given price level is what we call value of national income. The cost of what you can buy in terms of goods and services. In terms of the basket of goods and services at any given price level is what we call value of national income. Then we have the volume of national income, which is the amount of money you can spend on the basket of goods and services within a period of time. Do you get the difference here? Value is the cost at different price level. Volume is the amount you will spend to buy this food basket of goods and services when you are given that money, when you are given that amount of money. So the amount you can spend to buy is your volume of national income. The cost at different price level is what we call the value of national income. Is it clear? Do you have any question about it? You can. Broadly reflect changes in other measures of national income over time. To what extent does this data support this? So, based on the data we have, on the system or in the textbook. We have our GNP, the gross national product, to be this amount in value. The value of our GNP is this. The value of our gross value is this. And the value of our net national income is this. So based on it, whenever you're checking the GDP, we already know what the GDP is. Oh, sorry, this is GDP, right? This is GDP. We said GDP is the total value of goods and services produced in a country over a financial year. That means probably a year. So your GDP, what is the reflection on the graph? Your GNP is more than your GDP, right? Why is the GNP more than the GDP? The GNP is more than the GDP because your GDP is your GNP is GDP plus earnings overseas. The amount of money people abroad earn, you add it up with your GDP. That's how you get your GNP. So in the graph, normally your GNP will be higher than your GDP. Do you get the point here? So based on the statistic, our GNP is more than our GDP. Why? Because our GNP is GDP plus earnings overseas. Do you get it? So that makes this bigger than this amount. Do you understand the point here? GNP. GNP is GDP plus earnings overseas. Since it's an addition to this, so definitely your GNP will be more than your GDP. Is that clear? So now for the GDP to the GVA, we said GVA is the basic price. So the value of what? The GDP minus indirect taxes plus subsidies gives us our GVA. So definitely whatever you have as your GDP, because of the indirect taxes added up to it, your indirect taxes are always more than your subsidies. Because consumption will be more than spending, government spending. Private consumption will be more than government spending. So which means the amount of money we pay on goods and services will be more than what government will spend on goods and services. Do you get it? So this will definitely reduce our GDP. So that's why your GVA will always be less than your GDP. I think that's clear to you. So look at it here. GVA is GDP minus indirect taxes minus indirect taxes plus subsidies. Is it clear? So your GNP is more than your GDP because your GDP you have to plus it with your earnings overseas before you get your GNP. So that's why your GNP is above the chart. The GDP is second in the chart because the only thing that is more than the GDP is your GNP, which is your gross national product. Okay. Then for the GDP is above the GVA because the GVA entails GDP minus indirect taxes plus subsidies. That is also clear, right? Is it clear, please? Then for your net national income, your NNI, what did I say? National income minus your depreciation. So the value of all your assets, the value of all your national assets, it will depreciate. It will start depreciating. So when you take it away, that's the market price. So your NNI is always at the bottom of the chart. Is it clear? The GNP is always at the top of the chart because you have to add up with your overseas earning. For your GDP is above the GVA because the GVA is GDP minus indirect taxes plus subsidies. Your GVA is above the NNI because your NNI is about the national income, less your depreciation. So that's how the chart is. So that's what they said you should confirm that. Based on what you have in this analysis, confirm to us why these statistics are like this. So your GNP is above the GDP. Your GDP is above the GVA. Your GVA is above the NNI. Do you have any question about it? It's clear, okay.